It was a quiet afternoon in the neighborhood. The sun was casting long shadows across the street, and most people were enjoying the calm weekend. Kids played on the sidewalks, neighbors chatted by their fences, and everything seemed peaceful until a single moment shattered the calm. Steven Seagal, dressed casually in a hoodie and sunglasses, was walking toward his driveway. He had that calm, unmistakable aura that comes from years of discipline, training, and experience. People noticed him, but in a way that was almost instinctive, a sense of respect, even if they didn't know him personally. From the other side of the street, a neighbor had been watching Steven with a mixture of arrogance and annoyance. Perhaps it was envy. Perhaps it was a need to prove something to anyone who would notice. Whatever the reason, the neighbor's demeanor shifted quickly, from casual observation to blatant aggression. Without warning, the neighbor stepped forward and threw a punch. The movement was fast and unplanned, a moment of pure impulsiveness. Time seemed to slow for the people watching. Bystanders gasped, phones instinctively raising to record. The neighborhood, which had just been calm and peaceful, suddenly felt tense and unpredictable. Steven didn't flinch. His face remained calm, his body relaxed, as if he had expected something like this all along. There was no retaliation, no aggressive move. Just a subtle, measured stance that communicated confidence and control. Even the kids playing nearby stopped to watch, sensing the shift in energy. People around were frozen in anticipation. Some whispered nervously, "Did he just?" while others held their breath, unsure of what would happen next. Everyone instinctively knew that the next few seconds could decide the tone of the entire encounter. And then it happened. Steven simply tilted his head slightly, a small but powerful gesture, and gave the neighbor a look that was calm, yet commanding. The kind of look that tells someone, think carefully before you act again. At that moment, viewers at home, on their phones or tablets, would already be leaning in, eyes glued to the screen. The tension was palpable. People everywhere, from New York to Manila, London to Sydney, could feel it through the screen. What the neighbor would do next, nobody could predict. What happened next left everyone frozen in disbelief. The punch had barely missed Steven, but the effect was instantaneous. Neighbors froze mid-step, kids stopped their play, and the few people walking by instinctively raised their phones. The sudden aggression had shattered the peaceful calm of the street. Yet, Steven Seagal remained completely composed, his body relaxed, his face calm, radiating the kind of confidence that comes only from years of discipline and experience. The neighbor, still fuming, took a step back. But instead of realizing his mistake, arrogance fueled his next move. He shouted, gesturing wildly, and stepped closer, trying to intimidate Steven. The sudden escalation caused a ripple of unease through the small crowd that had gathered. Whispers spread. Why is he acting like that? What's going on? People instinctively held their breath. Cameras recorded every detail. The tense standoff, the neighbor's aggression, and Steven's unshakable calm. It was as if the world had slowed down for a moment, giving everyone time to register the full weight of the situation. Steven, however, didn't respond aggressively. Instead, he raised a single hand slightly, signaling both restraint and awareness. His calm demeanor sent a clear message. I'm in control, and you're about to regret your actions if you don't think twice. The neighbor, blinded by ego, didn't notice the subtle warning. The crowd grew larger. Some neighbors came closer to get a better view, while others cautiously maintained a safe distance. Phones captured the moment from multiple angles. The tension was almost tangible, the kind of suspense that leaves everyone leaning forward, unable to look away. At this point, you can engage viewers directly. Before we see what happens next, tell me in the comments, which city or country are you watching from? Are you seeing this unfold from New York, London, Manila, or somewhere else? This simple question encourages viewers to interact, boosting engagement while keeping them invested in the story. Meanwhile, the neighbor tried again to assert dominance. You think you could just stand there? You think you're better than me? He yelled. His voice carried across the quiet street, shaking some of the bystanders. But Steven's eyes remained steady, his posture unyielding. There was no fear, no anger, just a calm readiness that made it impossible for the neighbor to predict his next move. Some onlookers started whispering among themselves, pointing out the contrast between the two men. "Look at him. He's not even moving," one said. "He's completely calm." Another murmured, "Who is that?" "He's terrifying in the best way." The curiosity and tension made the scene feel electric. Steven's presence alone was enough to hold the situation in check. Yet the neighbor, blinded by ego and frustration, refused to back down. Every movement he made only increased the suspense. The crowd could sense the tipping point, that one wrong move could escalate everything in a heartbeat. By now, the tension had become almost unbearable. People leaned on fences, stopped mid-walk, and held their breath. Phones were raised, capturing every subtle gesture, every shift in the neighbor's posture, and every flicker of expression on Steven's calm face. The anticipation built to a crescendo, the kind that makes viewers feel they are part of the moment, as if they're standing right there on the street. And yet, Steven still hadn't made a single aggressive move. His restraint created a mental trap for viewers. The suspense wasn't in what he might do, but in what the neighbor would do next. Would the neighbor finally realize his mistake, or was he about to make the worst decision of his life? The neighbor's arrogance had reached a new level. Despite the previous warning signs, he stepped closer to Steven Seagal, his face red with frustration. His fists clenched, his chest heaving with adrenaline. Every muscle in his body screamed aggression, as if he had convinced himself that this time he would finally teach Steven a lesson. But Steven didn't move. Not a single muscle twitched except for the subtle shift of his weight, enough to show readiness without aggression. His calm aura made the air almost heavier, creating a silent tension that everyone around could feel. Neighbors froze mid-step, pedestrians stopped, and even children playing nearby slowed their games to watch. The quiet street had transformed into a scene charged with suspense. The neighbor yelled, trying to provoke Steven. "Think you're better than me? You're nothing." He swung his arm in a careless, impulsive gesture, not aiming to hit, but attempting intimidation. But Steven remained steady, eyes locked on the neighbor with unwavering focus. There was no fear, no panic, no anger, only a sense of absolute control that made the aggressor hesitate, just for a split second. Bystanders began whispering among themselves, some holding their phones up to capture the moment. "Look at him. He's not even flinching," one woman whispered. "He's completely calm." Another man shook his head, murmuring, "Who is this?" "He's terrifying in the best way." Every whispered word amplified the intensity, drawing viewers deeper into the scene. The neighbor's frustration grew as he realized his tactics weren't working. His movements became more erratic, his voice louder, his aggression more visible. But with each escalation, Steven's calmness only highlighted the absurdity of the neighbor's behavior. The contrast between rage and composure was almost hypnotic, a battle of mental strength rather than physical power. If this happened right in front of you, what would you do? Stay calm like Steven, or react impulsively like the neighbor? Comment your answer below. We're watching from all over the world. This simple call to action encourages viewers to imagine themselves in the scene and increases interaction, making them feel part of the story. Meanwhile, the tension in the crowd was palpable. Some people inched closer, curiosity mixed with concern, while others held back, unsure of how the confrontation would unfold. Every eye in the vicinity was glued to Steven, waiting for a reaction that never came. And that was the most frustrating part for the neighbor. The more aggressive he became, the less it seemed to affect Steven. The neighbor attempted one last verbal jab, trying to belittle Steven publicly. "I'm not afraid of you," he shouted. His words were loud, full of ego, but empty of awareness. The crowd gasped as they realized that despite all his bluster, the neighbor was walking a thin line between embarrassment and disaster. Steven finally spoke, his voice calm, measured, yet carrying undeniable authority. "You don't need to prove anything by acting recklessly. Respect is earned, not forced." The words were soft, but the impact was immense. The street went silent. Every bystander instinctively understood the weight behind them. These weren't empty words. They were the words of someone who had faced countless challenges and walked away with dignity. For a moment, time seemed to slow. The neighbor blinked, unsure whether to lash out or retreat. Every heartbeat in the crowd synced with the tension, the suspense, and the unspoken question: what would happen next? Steven's composure had turned the scenario into more than a neighborhood confrontation. It had become a lesson in patience, control, and respect, one that captivated everyone standing there and everyone watching through videos online. The emotional trap was set. Viewers were now mentally invested. They were rooting for justice, waiting for the neighbor to either realize his mistake or make a fateful decision. The suspense had reached its peak, and no one knew what the next moment would bring. Would the neighbor finally learn his lesson, or was he about to make a mistake he'd instantly regret? The neighborhood had fallen into an uneasy silence. The tension from the previous moments hung in the air like an invisible weight. The neighbor, still red-faced and agitated, was pacing slightly, trying to intimidate Steven Seagal with his posture and erratic gestures. But something had changed. Steven's calm, unshakable presence had started to have an effect. With a subtle step forward and a steady gaze, Steven didn't need to speak loudly. The quiet confidence in his body language spoke volumes. He didn't flinch, didn't shout, didn't raise his fists. Every subtle movement he made was calculated, measured, and full of intent. For anyone watching, it was clear that this was no ordinary confrontation. People in the crowd began leaning closer, whispering amongst themselves. "Who is that?" one neighbor asked quietly. "He's not just calm, he's commanding." Phones were still recording, capturing every detail. The contrast between the neighbor's uncontrolled aggression and Steven's composed demeanor. As whispers spread, a few people in the back gasped. One bystander muttered, "Wait, isn't that Steven Seagal?" Eyes widened, and the word traveled quickly through the crowd. "That's him, the actor, the martial arts legend." Suddenly, the energy of the street shifted. The neighbor, oblivious to the growing recognition, continued his aggression, unaware that the dynamic had completely changed. The crowd now viewed the situation through a new lens. This was no longer just a neighborly argument. This was a confrontation with someone extraordinary, someone whose calmness carried decades of experience and discipline. Steven's subtle gestures, a tilt of the head, a steadying stance, the smallest step forward, began to control the rhythm of the encounter. The neighbor's movements became hesitant, unsure, as if the crowd's whispers had entered his mind. "Wait, maybe I've miscalculated," he thought, though pride wouldn't let him admit it out loud. The crowd itself played a new role. People instinctively began to back away slightly, giving space to Steven, but also drawing closer to witness what was unfolding. The whispers grew. "Look at him. He's not even tense. How is he not reacting?" You can see the confidence radiating. Viewers at home, watching the clip or live feed, felt the same suspense. Everyone was mentally leaning in, trying to anticipate the next move. The neighbor's ego and aggression now seemed out of place, almost cartoonish against Steven's calm control. Steven finally spoke, not to intimidate, but to shift the mindset of the crowd and the aggressor. His voice was low, controlled, and smooth. "You don't need to prove anything here. Calmness and respect carry more power than anger." The words weren't loud, but they carried undeniable authority. The street went quiet. Even the neighbor hesitated mid-motion. The realization started to hit the neighbor, slowly and painfully. The more he tried to assert himself physically, the more the crowd noticed his insecurity. Meanwhile, Steven's composure acted as a mirror, reflecting the neighbor's own impulsive behavior back to him. Pride and frustration waged a silent war in the aggressor's mind. The crowd now fully recognized Steven Seagal. Phones recorded from every angle, capturing not just a confrontation, but a lesson in mental strength and restraint. Some viewers whispered in amazement, "This is incredible. Look at how calm he is." The presence of a recognizable figure added another layer of tension. The neighbor now risked public embarrassment in front of friends, neighbors, and the cameras streaming to the world. The psychological shift was complete. The neighbor's aggression began to falter, and the balance of power subtly moved to Steven's side. The street, once tense with fear and uncertainty, now buzzed with anticipation. Everyone watching, physically there or online, felt the magnetism of the moment, the suspense of what would happen next. Would the neighbor finally realize his mistake, or was he about to make the worst decision of his life? At this moment, the stage was set for the turning point, where action, recognition, and consequence would converge in a way no one present would ever forget. The tension in the street had reached a peak. Every whisper, every subtle movement, every held breath from the crowd was a reminder that this confrontation was no longer ordinary. The neighbor, red-faced and jittery, still tried to assert dominance, waving his arms, shouting, and stepping forward. But something had changed. His aggression now felt futile against Steven Seagal's unshakable composure. Steven stood silently, absorbing every move, every twitch, every verbal jab. His body was relaxed, his eyes focused, his demeanor calm, yet commanding. Every person in the vicinity could sense it. There was no hesitation, no fear, no impulsive reaction. Just steady awareness. Then came a moment of truth. The neighbor lunged forward, perhaps expecting Steven to flinch or retaliate. It was an impulsive act, fueled by pride, frustration, and a desperate need to assert himself. But Steven didn't flinch. Instead, he subtly shifted his stance, a small adjustment of his foot and shoulders, just enough to signal readiness and awareness. It wasn't about striking or punishing. It was about control and authority. The crowd gasped. Phones captured every movement, every subtle expression. People whispered in amazement. He's not even reacting. He's controlling the situation without moving a muscle. Another onlooker murmured. That look alone could stop anyone. Steven finally broke the silence, his voice calm, yet unmistakably authoritative. Violence isn't the answer. Acting recklessly only makes things worse. Step back and think. His words weren't loud or threatening, but they carried the weight of experience, confidence, and wisdom. The streets seemed to lean in to hear him. Even the neighbors stopped mid-motion, his chest heaving, unsure of how to respond. The turning point was subtle but undeniable. The neighbor's bravado began to crumble. His gestures became slower, hesitant, and clumsy. Every movement he made now contrasted sharply with Steven's measured calmness. The crowd could sense it. The balance of power had shifted entirely. Even without throwing a punch, Steven had mentally and emotionally taken control of the moment. The neighbor's arrogance started to falter under the silent pressure of awareness and composure. People around began to murmur. He's completely calm. The neighbor looks ridiculous. The psychological effect was palpable. The neighbor's aggression had been neutralized without anyone being hurt. If you were watching this live, what would you be feeling right now? Excitement, suspense, or relief? Comment below. I want to know where you are watching from. This encourages viewers to interact while remaining completely safe and within YouTube guidelines. Steven's next move was simple yet powerful. He maintained eye contact, subtly positioning himself so that any further reckless movement by the neighbor would appear even more foolish. It wasn't about physical strength or retaliation. It was about mental dominance. The neighbor, blinded by ego, tried one last attempt to shout, but the words fell flat. The authority in Steven's calm presence was undeniable. The crowd's energy had completely shifted. The bystanders who had been anxious moments ago were now silently rooting for Steven. Phones kept recording, capturing the lesson in restraint, awareness, and mental strength. The neighbor's posture slumped slightly. Pride and frustration battled internally, leaving him embarrassed and unsure. Steven's calm control wasn't just a message to the neighbor. It was a lesson for everyone watching. The power of patience, composure, and self-control had won over rash aggression. The tension that had gripped the neighborhood for minutes now began to dissolve, replaced by admiration and relief. Who would have thought that staying calm could hold more power than any punch? Whispered someone in the crowd. And in that exact moment, The stage was set for the final reveal, where the neighbor's mistake would be fully realized and the story would reach its satisfying resolution. Every eye in the street, every camera lens, and every viewer at home was focused on what would happen next. The street had gone quiet. The tension that had gripped everyone for minutes now reached its peak. The neighbor, still flushed with anger and pride, took one last hesitant step forward, perhaps hoping to regain control. But all the subtle movements, the controlled posture, and the calm gaze from Steven Seagal had taken their toll. Something inside the neighbor shifted, a dawning realization that his impulsiveness had left him exposed, both in front of the crowd and, eventually, in front of himself. People around began whispering, nudging each other, and pointing their phones toward the neighbor. "Look at him," one bystander murmured. "He's realizing he's completely outmatched, and not physically, but mentally." Another added, "It's incredible how calm he is just by standing there." Steven, maintaining his composure, didn't need to raise his voice or make any dramatic gesture. The subtle changes in his stance, the confidence radiating from every movement, were enough to make the neighbor falter. For the first time, the neighbor's arrogance wavered. His fists unclenched slightly, and he shifted his weight uncomfortably. His bravado was giving way to embarrassment. Then came the critical moment. The realization fully struck. The neighbor's eyes widened, his mouth opened slightly, and he froze in place. The crowd collectively noticed the shift. He finally understood that his reckless behavior had been both unnecessary and deeply foolish. His attempt at intimidation had completely backfired. Have you ever seen someone instantly regret their actions? Type yes or no in the comments. This draws viewers into the story emotionally, letting them participate in the moment while keeping it fully safe. As the tension broke, murmurs of recognition and awe spread across the street. Some bystanders quietly voiced what everyone was thinking. That's Steven Seagal, the martial arts master, the actor, the man who exudes calm and authority. Realizing whom he had been confronting only added to the neighbor's embarrassment. His aggression now seemed petty and ill-advised in hindsight. Steven didn't gloat or humiliate the neighbor. He simply remained composed, his calm presence a silent reminder of the power of self-control. He offered the kind of authority that doesn't need shouting, the quiet kind that commands respect without aggression. The crowd started clapping quietly, more out of relief than celebration. Phones captured the neighbor's subtle slump, the shift in his posture, and the awe in everyone's eyes. The street that had been tense with conflict just minutes earlier was now filled with admiration and respect for Steven's demeanor. People were witnessing a real-life demonstration of restraint, confidence, and the mental mastery that comes with experience. The neighbor, finally aware of how his impulsiveness had made him look, took a small step back, avoiding further confrontation. Some whispered apologies, while others simply shook their heads in disbelief. The embarrassment was real, but no harm had been done, a perfect resolution without physical confrontation. The street now felt lighter. Bystanders started talking quietly among themselves, some replaying the moments they had just witnessed on their phones. The lesson was clear. Strength isn't always about fighting back. Sometimes it's about controlling your mind, staying calm, and letting composure speak louder than words or aggression. Steven gave a small nod, almost imperceptible, acknowledging the crowd without a word. That gesture alone spoke volumes. Dignity, control, and the subtle power of standing firm without aggression. The neighbor, humbled and realizing his mistake, quietly retreated, leaving everyone with a mix of relief and awe. For viewers watching online, the scene was unforgettable, a demonstration of mental strength and instant regret that was both satisfying and emotionally rewarding. The suspense had been intense, but the resolution had delivered exactly the payoff everyone was waiting for. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from fighting, but from standing calm and letting wisdom guide the moment. The confrontation had ended, but the energy on the street lingered. Neighbors and bystanders were still processing what had just happened. What had started as a reckless, impulsive act from the arrogant neighbor had turned into a powerful lesson in restraint, confidence, and dignity, all without a single act of violence. Steven Seagal stood calmly, his posture relaxed but still commanding. He didn't gloat, shout, or celebrate. He simply allowed the situation to settle naturally, letting the neighbor's embarrassment speak louder than any words could. The quiet respect he commanded was a reminder to everyone present. True strength isn't in aggression. It's in control, patience, and mental clarity. People started talking quietly among themselves, sharing their reactions. Phones were still recording, ready to capture every subtle detail for those who couldn't witness the moment in person. The neighbor, now humbled, retreated to his yard, realizing how poorly he had handled the situation. His anger and arrogance had been replaced with regret, and a lesson had been learned in a way that left no physical harm. By this point, the story had already begun to spread. Bystanders shared the footage online, and within hours, videos were circulating across social media. Comments and reactions poured in from all over the world, from New York to Manila, London to Sydney. Millions of viewers were captivated, praising Steven's composure and the clear lesson about self-control and respect. If you believe that calmness and respect are stronger than aggression, type respect in the comments right now. Let's see how many of us agree. The lesson of the day was simple but powerful. Appearances can be deceiving, and arrogance can make someone underestimate the wrong person. The neighbor had acted impulsively, expecting to intimidate someone physically stronger or more skilled, only to find that the true power was mental and emotional. Steven's calm response not only neutralized the aggression, but also taught a silent, unforgettable lesson to everyone who witnessed it. Even after the crowd dispersed, the impact of the moment remained. People recounted the story to friends and family, emphasizing the contrast between the neighbor's rash behavior and Steven's disciplined, measured approach. It was a real-life example of how patience and control can transform a potentially dangerous situation into a demonstration of strength and wisdom. For those watching online, the story offered both suspense and satisfaction. The adrenaline of the moment, the uncertainty of the neighbor's next move, and the eventual resolution created an emotional journey that was both captivating and inspiring. The outcome proved that dignity, calm, and respect always win, and that true authority comes from self-control, not intimidation. As the sun began to set, the street returned to normal, but the story lived on in videos, comments, and conversations across the globe. Viewers were left with a powerful reminder. Courage isn't always about fighting. Sometimes it's about standing firm, staying calm, and letting your composure speak for itself. Remember, strength is measured not by the power of your punches, but by the power of your patience and control.